Yeah, my black metal name is Rick.
Hi, I'm Vlad Bresnix. Welcome back to the BresnixCast, episode number 26, and we are just absolutely flying through Black Metal Week here. And my guest for this show is Rick Millington from the British metal band Hryre. Now, Rick was a great guest actually, funny, insightful, we got a bit philosophical and stuff at times, but I thought it was a really good interview. And I'd love to get Rick back on the show again. Get him on a better microphone, it would just be perfection. But yes, Hryre are a good band. If you're not familiar with them, I recommend you check out their album From Mortality To Infinity. We're going to talk about it a little bit. And before we get to my conversation with Rick, let's hear something from it. So, this is Devastation of Empires.
Allegiance to our chains, allegiance to our Spartan canvas now smeared with rot. Cold and desolate vastlands wrapped in a shroud of clandestine frost. Monuments to our ancients now decayed and discarded. Buried neath empires that lay in ruin, a legacy destroyed in the blink of an eye. A long unspeakable tyranny brought to its knees. Crushed by the same ideology it tried to erase.
Okay, so Black Metal Week continues, and I am here with Rick Millington from Hryre. Hryre. We were actually just talking about that right before we went on. Rick, thanks so much for coming on the show, man.
Oh, thanks very much for having us, man. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you on. I listened to your album and I really was digging it. So, just starting off, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself and how you got started?
Well, it's a bit of a funny one, really, but I suppose loads of bands say that, don't they? We never really set out with this intention of being a black metal band per se. I mean, what actually happened was I was a teacher at a college in Halifax, and Nathan Patchett, who was the other principal writer of the material, was actually a student of mine, and he was growing disillusioned with being on the course that I was teaching, which was like music performance and composition, because he was playing all the different styles that was expected of him, like rock, indie, punk, soul, all the rest of it. And he was just getting a bit disillusioned that nobody on the course or really wanted to play the sort of stuff that he was into, which was black metal. And I'm like, shit, dude, I love black metal. If it helps and you want to compose some of this stuff as part of your coursework, why not hang back a bit after college, use the computers, plug your guitar in and totally indulge yourself? So I started doing a little bit with him just to kind of help keep him on track and give him the experience he wanted from his studies. And then we just started putting really good riffs together. We got on a lot more, and then we went for this blackened death metal kind of Akikoki rip-off thing. But then we just started becoming more into tune with the dissonance and atonality of more black metal, and then we started listening to what other bands closer to us what we're doing, and then started taking a bit of influence from that. So from that, we just put an EP together, threw it out amongst a couple of people, got a decent response, got in contact with Gareth Hodgson, who's the drummer for A Forest of Stars and Deus Vermin and Hryre. He's a right little drum whore. He drums for everyone. But then, I got in contact with him. He really liked the stuff, so we met up with him. He said that he wanted to really invest in the band creatively. So then we recorded the proper EP, released that. That got a really good reception. Owl Records offered to sign us up to a 2-album deal, so we took that, used some of the material from the previous EP and put it as a 2-parter of the album, which is now from Mortality To Infinity, which is what's out and about now. So that's pretty much a long-winded answer, but that's pretty much where we're from, man.
I know, it's all right. It's not even remotely long-winded. You've obviously not podcasted very long. No, but as I was going to say, so like it was interesting as well because like so if you go onto like your Bandcamp and stuff, right, it says that you focus your music towards your concepts surrounding ancient heritage, individualism, and spirituality. All things I'm interested in. So tell me a bit more about it.
Well, I think the ancient heritage really give us more of a platform in which to build. To be honest, obviously, you know, a lot. Heritage is really important in black metal, I think. For me, anyway. Again, you might ask somebody else that could, you know, they give you a completely different answer, which is one of the good things about the style. But for us, I think immersing yourself in your environment and the heritage in which you're from, I think, is an important part. But we're also very focused on your own individual, like, interpretation or involvement with that. So it's, you know, it's more focused towards, as I say, your own individual stance with where you are, how you appreciate your surroundings, and how that kind of invokes aural responses within you, how you think these environments should sound. And yeah, we kind of use the whole heritage thing more as a narrative in the respect of like pre-Christian Europe. It was a very small part in our initial exploration, really, but it gave us a really significant stepping stone to kind of find ourselves within a style that we feel is growing in this part of the world. But also with the spirituality concept, it's offering us the opportunity to kind of not grow away from that, but kind of grab the ball and run in our own direction with it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. I know what you mean. And so I've been interested in this kind of stuff as well. And, you know, you mentioned like the heritage and importance of that kind of thing and where you're from. I mean, two of the bands that are involved in Black Metal Week, you know, Old Corpse Road and Fen, that's very much their sort of focus as well, you know, and they think that that's quite an important thing. And I think so too, because that's the thing. I mean, like, black metal has that. It's weird how it's that one type of metal that's got really, it's kind of known for looking back in that way. I know it's not every single band, but, you know, you do get a lot of black metal bands that draw on, like, you know, history and, like, old heritage and even, like, you know, the sounds of kind of where they're from and stuff. And especially with atmospheric black metal and the rise of that became quite a bigger thing. I just think it's quite interesting. I think more than other forms of music, it is more geared towards history and stuff, maybe except for Viking metal or something, I suppose.
Yeah. I think where we stand with it, as I've said, it's, I mean, Blighty Band, like you mentioned, like Winter for this Fen and Old Corpse Road do a fantastic job of writing music of which is centered around the heritage. Whereas I think we differ because, again, we're not going to attempt to write songs about specific folk tales or necessarily historical events, but more looking at the kind of the changing of the landscape and the changing and evolution, devolution, whichever way you want to look at it, of kind of British society. Do we see it as a necessary thing? Do we see it as something that's actually been forced upon us by, changing in world governments and, authorities? We kind of say, the band for a start, Hryre, is Anglo-Saxon for ruin. So it basically what we draw inspiration from is something that either lies in ruin and what you build out from it. You know, you can't deny your heritage. You can't deny the history of where it is that you're from, but it's kind of how you adapt those stories. Now, you can do what we do, where we do like a literal meaning as well, but the individuality kind of lies upon the letting go of something or changing things about yourself that you know you need to change, like negative thought processes or negative habits that you might have. So you see the ruin of those thought processes is a necessary thing to better in yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No. And it is interesting, that kind of thing. Like, I know as well, like, if we think about, like, how, you know, like, black metal uses a lot of sort of like paganistic stuff, and it's interesting because like I grew up like Catholic and stuff, right? And then like, you know, I've talked about this quite a bit in the show, and then I got involved in occultism and things like that, and that led me on to like studying runes and stuff like that. Now, I don't exactly know what it would be like, for example, if, you know, we still had the sort of older ways here. I don't know, but people say, oh, it would have been brutality, but like, how do you know? Christianity was brutality at the start, and then it kind of got softer over the years, so you've got no idea. But I actually think it's kind of, I got very interested, even when I was doing like, originally getting started in occultism and like the OTO doing Thelema and stuff, we would do rituals that would involve like Egyptian god names and things like that, you know, that sort of Greek god names, and I would be thinking, there is like Celtic, Norse god names, ones that are more close and local to where we are, and, you know, like, why don't we incorporate that kind of stuff? Like, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I'm not, I wouldn't say I was agnostic or anything of that, really. I mean, I kind of respect all religions as much as I loathe them, I suppose, because, you know, there are good examples and bad examples within every kind of doctrine or dogma. What I'm saying is like, I think you should be open-minded to explore all possibilities of spirituality, and that might lie in theology, and it might lie in philosophy. Sorry. So I think, you know, as much as I say, I loathe religion, and I also respect it, and I respect the value that it does have in people's lives. It's easy to say that paganism was brutal because you only ever really know about what's been mass produced, and, you know, nothing's really been written or documented, or if it was,
and those things were written by monks, so they were characterized often in a certain way.
Exactly. So it's not really a true representation. I suppose if, like, you know, if, you know, you're sharing a street with somebody who's a Catholic and he's a stand-up bloke, you know, and his faith helps him be that stand-up person, then right on, you know what I mean? You if it makes you a better person, then do what you will. You know, is a lot of my own personal belief. I wouldn't say it was deep-rooted in Aleister Crowley per se, but those are words that resonate, is, you know, do what thou will and this shall be the whole of the law. And to me, I don't think that's, you know, subject yourself to every, you know, perversion. I say that as in keep an open mind, do what you wish to do, but, you know, be upstanding and don't bring harm or ill regard towards other people, you know.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I mean, I should probably mention a wee note on that, because I did some degrees in the OTO, and I'm like very conversant, obviously, with Crowley's work and his magic. I still practice a lot of it to an extent. Yeah. And, you know, that's what people get wrong. They think do it that well is the whole, shall be the whole of the law, as means like, you do whatever you like and fuck it. It's not that at all. What he's talking about there is your true will, and your true will is not something that's harmful to others, because that's not going to lead you to any positive place. So it doesn't mean just go about doing whatever you like. You know, a lot of people get it wrong about Crowley in a big way. There's all these myths and legends, you know, about, even up in Scotland, because he owned Boleskine House up here, and, you know, Jimmy Page later bought it, and there's all this stuff about what went on and all that. And there is a lot of like, there's a lot of legends and there's a lot of untruths about Crowley. I mean, Crowley was actually an incredibly accomplished man, and what a lot of people don't realise as well about, some people say he's like a cult leader or something, but if you actually read anything he's written, he says, don't take my word for it. His famous expression is, let your experience be your guide. So he's basically saying, don't take my word for anything, do it yourself, and if it doesn't work, then don't do it anymore.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, I suppose that touches on the individuality aspect. That's very important to ours. I mean, again, we draw upon the influence from ancient heritage because it's a very prominent feature in black metal, and it's a very easy place for us to start. It gives us a place to start our own journey and kind of grow from, but it is the individuality and the spirituality, and turning negative thought process into positive actions is a very, very big part of, well, I can only speak for myself, but it's a very, very big part of what we do, really. It's cathartic. It takes the atonality that represents those negative thought processes, and rather than, you know, using those negative thought processes to damage yourself or others, why not write music and express yourself that way, then people can enjoy that music and maybe even express themselves in a similar way. So therefore, you're taking negative thought processes and you're bringing positives out of them. I think that's what you should be doing, really.
Yeah, I mean, and then that, if we're continuing the sort of occult theme, that's basically transmutation. You know, you're taking something that's one thing and turning it into something completely different. You know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing. So we need to talk about your album. Came out in 2016 from Mortality to Infinity. It's a very good album. I encourage everyone to listen to it. Tell us a bit about it.
Why? Well, what we're actually trying to do is like a trilogy. And the album represents the first two parts. So the first part is an Empire in Ruin, which represents a death aesthetic. Now, I don't want to go into far too much detail because I'm a big believer in people interpreting art in their own way because it becomes more meaningful to them. Yeah. But, you know, you could look at the death aesthetic as in the physical death of things, or you could see it as in the demise of old England, or you can see it as in, as I explained before, identifying negative traits within yourself, which you must lay waste to. So that first part of the album represents that death, that ruin, the empire in ruin. And again, that empire is totally subjective. The second part of the album, which marks the second part in the trilogy, is all about transition, so making that move from what is old towards what will be the new. And again, you can see that as in a physical astral perspective where you're transcending into, the void or the great beyond. Or you can see that as in like the arduous journey which you must endure to get to be where you need to be, as if you, let's just say, quitting smoking, for example.
Just done it. Nearly 2 weeks. Yes, nearly 2 weeks.
Actually, you're in the transition part of the album now, and this is relevant. It's a horrible change to becoming, you know where you need to be, and you know what you must avoid, and you're kind of in this middle bit of making those changes, and that's the real kicker, which is why songs like Regress States of Malice and Lamenting the Coming Dread are really important, because it really brings it to the fore, those awful feelings of moving from one thing to the next, the unexpected dread, is what you might interpret of that. The second album, which we're currently working on, we've still got a lot of work to do on it, and we're hoping a late 2019 release, maybe on the cards, but don't hold me to that. That is going to represent the rebirth, and it's going to be more focused on nature. So again, if you wanted to take the death transition aesthetic, and then thinking of like, being reborn, or your energies are then dispersed from your once mortal self into entwining with nature. So I think that's pretty much where we're going, and that's the plan.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that it's a lot more about nature, because I especially find kind of like stuff that's themed on kind of nature and metal to be quite interesting, because sometimes you just get the phrase nature in your mind and you think of like bunnies and grass and shit. But when you think about it, nature is the thing. People always talk about man conquering nature, but you can't. It's impossible, because like nature always wins. Nature controls everything. You know what I mean? So like it's an unstoppable force.
Yes, absolutely. It is. God in a way, isn't it? Because it's nature that put us here, and whether it was the Big Bang, that's God right there, isn't it? There's no denying the creator there. And I think, like you say, nature will always win. Nature will always have the final word. And I'm with you on that. I don't think there's such a thing or such a thought more ridiculous than man conquering nature. It will never happen.
I mean, even like it's funny in that I think we were talking about Crowley earlier, and we'll go off on a wee bit of tangent. It doesn't matter. I think that he still holds records for like his crazy mountain climbing and stuff like that, and because people have climbed the same mountains now, but not with the lack of equipment that he had, without oxygen and stuff like that. And, he came from that generation that had a kind of idea of like man conquering nature and all that. And that was a thing that people talked about, philosophers and stuff like that. And it's just interesting to think. It just seems so, I don't know, in a way kind of hubristic. Like it's, because it's just like, you can't, like stop an earthquake. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to happen.
It is. it just comes from that, like you said, that need to exalt mankind above every other living thing, including the very thing in which he or she lives. It's a bit, I think it's counterintuitive. I think if we just accept that we're actually all one and the same and we are a part of this, then I think that's a much more healthier way towards a more fulfilling existence. I think we said in one of the tracks on Ancient Plagues on Ancient Graves is essentially like, if you can question existence and form your own conclusions based on, what is fact and, and your own intuition, then you can make sense of your own existence, but nobody else's. And once you can start making sense and start accepting your own existence and who you are, then your mind will actually really awaken then. And then you can start looking at, looking at your own life and your impact on the world in a bit more of a healthier, productive way. I don't know if that's really arrogant of me to say though, but that's kind of how I view it.
No, I don't think it's arrogant at all. When you're talking, you reminded me of that. I don't know if you're familiar with Alan Watts. He had that old quote before when he said he's talking to someone, he was like, I'm quite sure I exist, but I'm not sure about you. And that seems a bit solipsistic, but it's quite funny. But see, even listening to the album, it sounds like you've got quite a few diverse influences that you're bringing in. You're not just doing the same thing every song. The spoken word bits and stuff, there's more of the kind of traditional black metal and stuff, but it goes up and down. So it sounds like you're incorporating a lot of diverse influences, but I think you make it into quite a cool and cohesive sort of sound.
I think that's really important, man. I think as composers or creators of music, in a way, you're kind of duty bound to bring new ideas, and you should do that because that's how new styles are developed. Music is never going to move forward if you just keep doing the same thing. Because if you keep doing the same thing, you're going to get the same result. Now, I'm not saying that we don't fall into a number of cliches. We do, and we do so unknowingly because the aesthetics of which is something that we particularly enjoy. But we take a lot of influences from bands like I do anyway, Voices and Akikoke, as well as bands like Yes and Genesis and Pink Floyd. I think we want. If you've got quite a wide palette, like I think I do, I'll go from anything from Abbath to ABBA, you know what I mean? I love it all. And I think if you've got that wide palette, I think you should be bringing more interesting things in. Try them out, see if they work, And I think Akikoke are one of the best examples of that about British bands, where they bring breakbeat into it, urban sounds into black metal. Brilliant. When you talk about Voices and their album London, which for me is probably one of my favourite albums in the last 5 years and will probably remain in my top 10 for some significant time because I think it is a masterstroke rather than doing the whole nature thing and abandon of society. They've gone right to the heart of London and they've used black metal to, exercise and express the anger and depravity of inner city London, and I think they've done that with the black metal aesthetic, and I think, you know what, man, that is fucking bang on. That's great way of doing it. For any music style to move forward, and we are firm believers of that, you've got to try new things, bring some new things to the fore, because then, it might lead on to better things, or at least, you've created something that you yourself enjoy, because you write music for yourself as a first instance. If you don't like the song that you've written, then you're not going to release it.
No, go on.
So I'm very much of the opinion that yes, if you fit into the atmospheric or progressive black metal thing, there are certain things that you're going to do, but there are also, when you talk about the idea of extreme, and I'll quote Sam Loynes because I interviewed Sam. He's from Voices guitarist. I interviewed him as part of my master's process, and I think he summed it up brilliantly when he said, the nature of for black metal or death metal is the concept of being extreme. Now, what is extreme? Is it being down-tuned? Is it being overly distorted? Is it being really gruesome in your lyrical descriptions? Or is it just or does extremity lie in the fact that or in the processes of something that have never been done before, like putting acoustic guitars over a double bass pedal? That's not really been done. So that in itself is extreme. Breaking the boundaries of what is conventional thought is just a way to achieve extremity, as down-tuned guitars and guttural growls. So I think definitely got to keep trying new things, bring new ideas to the fore, but don't break too far from the mold of where you're coming from, because you can just end up losing yourself completely. But as I said, we started at this point. Like, if you picture it like in the middle of a disc, we've started out at this heritage thing, and we're going to expand. We want to expand and go into loads of different unexplored avenues, well, in relevance to us anyway. And, just keep trying to pick new things up, try new things. I think that to me is what makes British black metal bands particularly a cut above.
Yeah, no, I totally know what you mean, and there's quite a lot in what you said, and I was thinking about a few things I was talking about with Frank from Fen, because we were kind of talking a bit about the first time I heard Fen, I felt I heard a prog influence. You kind of mentioned prog music like Yes and stuff like that, and Genesis and stuff. And by the way, just before we go anywhere else, Genesis were good up to Foxtrot. And then not for me. Phil Collins is a drummer. I'm sorry, I just need to get that out of me.
That's fine, you got to speak your mind.
I've got to say it, but anyway. But it's funny as well. Then you were talking about what is now extreme. You're talking about the down-tuned acoustic guitars over the blast beats and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, because when me and Frank were talking, he was talking about how he's think about it. He's this is 20 years ago, black metal starting and stuff like more than 20 years now, but it's quite a while ago. So you think about when black metal started, what was considered 20 years earlier, Sabbath and stuff, what was considered classic metal then. And he's in a way, what, is maybe traditional black metal is considered extreme is now conventional, because it's been around for a long time. So it's not really extreme if it's been around, if you know what I mean. You can put it that way. And like you're saying, it's, what the definition of extreme is changes, based on what's been done and, what has been done before and what's being done now.
Exactly. I think one thing that I wouldn't say I discovered it, but that I kind of stumbled upon when I was reading about sort of developments in genre. Again, as I was saying, for the last 2.5 years, I've been doing my master's degree, and based on music composition. One of the interesting things that I think is worth anybody looking at is Christian Metz's genre theory. And again, when you talk about the last 20 years where, black metal, in terms of...
Sorry, can you just explain what genre theory is to us?
Genre theory is it's how genres develop and how they then, become either something else. So if you take, there are different steps in Christian Metz's genre theory. First being the classical, which is the original piece of work that develops codes and conventions for the genre. So if you look at, say, for example, Venom or Bathory or Celtic Frost, they brought they defined these conventions for what would have been, become black metal. But then it talks about the experimental phase where the style becomes established. Then artists start looking at genres that a little bit further afield, but in some way related, like folk. So you get Viking metal or folk metal, or you get atmospheric black metal, or do you know what I mean? So other ideas come into it, and then it becomes a parody where it's almost like a piss take, where all of these core aesthetics from the styles are then the very thing that people take the piss out of, and then it just goes to deconstruction from that, where hybrid styles are then, re-established and moved on. So then you've got like satanic death metal, or you've got National Socialist black metal. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, that's quite interesting actually. Because I wasn't really sure what you meant by genre theory, but like, yeah, that does make sense. See, when you give the examples of like in these genres, you can actually see what you mean. How you start with one thing. I mean, I suppose it's even like, with punk. You started with punk was one thing, and now punk is a million things.
Exactly, and that's just part of the necessary growth of genre. I mean, Christian Metz's genre theory was related to film, but it's relevant right across the arts when you look at it in quite a simplistic, as quite a simplistic concept, really. So I think again, it's counterintuitive to keep black metal in Norway, keep it about Satan, and keeping it low fidelity. I think you've got to experiment, and you've got to be true with your own explorations as well. Like if you want to stick a bit of Genesis in there or Genesis influence, even post Gabriel, then go for it.
It's interesting you say to me that like you're obviously quite well educated, teaching about music composition and things like that. And it's just a lot of people I've met like, over the years in different scenes and stuff, myself playing in different bands. A lot of the people I met were kind of like, it was interesting, they were more kind of self-taught people. A lot of them still had like quite a knowledge of music theory, but a lot of them were kind of well taught. So like, I've always been interested in this, and I've talked about it shows and shows ago, about like sort of what I perceive as the difference between like classically trained and like self-trained musicians. So I'd love to kind of get your thoughts on this, because what I've kind of noticed, and I've known a lot of classically trained musicians, a lot of self-taught musicians, and I'm a kind of hybrid in the way that my dad was in like country and folk bands. He was a bass player, but he taught me how to a few chords on the guitar, and he would help me out and stuff, but he was very thingy about, you should really try and teach yourself, because this is what I did. But at the same time, like, no one in my house could play a piano, so I was sent to like formal piano lessons. So sometimes I notice that when I talk to people who are more classically trained versus people who are more like sort of self-trained, it's sometimes like it's interesting, because a lot of the self-taught people are more like, they're kind of more free in how they do things, because they don't really have the parameters drilled into them. It's not true for everyone, but I just mean in general, versus some of the classically trained people that are sometimes like, oh, I can't do that because that's not really how you do that. They've kind of been taught in a way to do things, whereas I think sometimes the self-taught people are more experimental. But I'd like to hear your thoughts about it.
Well, I think I didn't really become like a musician of sorts until I was about 16. I'd messed around. I'd probably learned about 3 chords whilst I was in secondary school, but nothing serious. I didn't really start getting it, as I said, since I left school. Now, I can understand what you thought, what people's thoughts might be about the young man or the young lady who was sent formal piano lessons and to go through the grades through the London College of Music or whatever. But I think the regimented mindset of what you could consider a classically trained or a musically educated youngster would be more to do with the fact that a child follows specific and thrives under specific and strict instruction. So therefore, I think that's more to do with conditioning at the age where they're at, where they say, no, you don't play that chord with this key, it doesn't belong, or you can't resolve a musical passage with a suspended second chord. So I learned my theory as part of going back to college and doing my level 3 and then doing my degree. And music theory and harmony is something that I've always kind of enjoyed, because it's not because it's complex or because it's pattern driven per se, but it does help you make sense of a lot of what you're doing. I don't use my music theory to determine what I'm going to do in a composition. I still, at 37-year-old, even though I've been teaching music for 15 years, I still do the very same thing when I'm writing. I just make shapes on the fingerboard. If I like the way they sound, then I'll use them. But then what I'll do is I'll actually figure out what I've done after, and then start identifying the relationships between the chords in the post of writing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't consider myself a classically trained musician unless I'm playing classical music, because I play contemporary music. And my theory is contemporary as well. I don't really read or write 4-part harmony, but I understand what harmony is and how, the Ed Sheerans are writing what is essentially the same stuff, but it's a tried and tested formula that's worked for ages. I try to use my musical education to kind of look back on the things that I've done and looking at relationships between passages that I've written, but I still very much gear towards exploring it for yourself. I think your dad was absolutely bang on when he showed you a few things to get you started, and then let you embark on your own journey with it. I personally don't think I could teach any of my sons a musical instrument because I don't want that's not my place. They need to find that stuff for themselves, So I think your dad was absolutely bang on. I think having that freedom to explore music, like you say, maybe the non-educated musician might have, but I'm still grateful for the theoretical grounding that I do have, where I can actually appreciate from a musical analysis perspective what I've done.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and it's funny. I remember the first thing my dad taught me. He taught me how to play "Knocking on Heaven's Door." He taught me all the chords first, and then it's only like G, D, C, and A minor, right. And then he taught me how to do that. And then if when I needed something, for example, when he was I was starting to get more into rock music. It was an acoustic guitar at first, and then I was bar chords, right? And he showed me the basics. Actually, using the frame of the Faces, "Stay With Me." Yeah. To explain how the bar chord thing works. And it's interesting as well because you're talking about how a lot of musicians, they have this they're doing these tried and tested patterns. Do you think sometimes as well there's self-taught people who are successful, but they don't necessarily understand the theory behind what they're doing, but for some reason their innate talent just enables them to do that, maybe just from hearing things over and over again. You get these people who are like Jimi Hendrix talked about, learning to play guitar by listening. I was never good at I've played with loads of guys who listen to something and then play it. I'm not really that guy. I'm more of a kind of improvisation sort of guy. But you get different musicians like that, do you know what I mean? So do you think some people kind of just get it innately and it's just their natural talent?
Absolutely, yeah, you do. I mean, I think I'm just going to go to the obvious ones. You've got people like Bob Dylan, Paul Simon, John Lennon, for example. Even Noel Gallagher has got that innate ability because they know a hook, and it's probably through listening to lots of records or just being more focused towards music in their younger lives and maybe being exposed to it more, where it just resounds with them a lot more naturally than other things. I mean, I've taught people who I've had to show them something quite complex once and they've just got it, and it makes you think, bloody hell, have they just got this natural gift that you're talking about? But then again, I've taught people how to count a bar of 4/4 at 120 BPM, and I've tried for fucking months and just cannot get it. And I mean no disrespect, because it's not like they're not trying, and it doesn't frustrate them that they can't. But it's as much as I am a believer that if you stick at something, you work hard, you give it your best, you'll eventually crack the nut. But, you can't help but think that there are people who just have this natural ability. Like David Bowie was one of them as well. He wasn't classically trained, but, I'm not a massive Bowie fan, and I'm not going to pretend that I am, but respect the guy, damn right. He's an amazing writer. But then, you've got musicians like Meatloaf and McCartney, who are more classically trained, and I'm not a Meatloaf fan or a McCartney fan either, but again,
I really dislike Meatloaf at a very visceral level.
And he supports Hartlepool as well,
Is that a sticking point for you?
Yeah, well, I'm a Middlesbrough supporter because, I'm from here, and Hartlepool, they're no major worry, but it's just Hartlepool, isn't it? The Hartlepool people, but sorry man, it's just like Meatloaf supports you. But yeah, in summary, there's definitely, there's something about certain people where they just get it, or they're just so in tune with musical ideas, or they're so hourly receptive that they can just really connect with it and create some, great pieces of music. I mean, the guy Steve Smith, who did the production for all of our studio work thus far, He's a good friend of mine, a very, very good friend of mine, and he's one of them. His ability to just adapt to any musical style, any production technique he can turn his hands to. The guy is an absolute animal in the. There's not a lot he can't do. He'll be researching film techniques of film, and then like 2 weeks later he'll be doing like animation and green screen stuff, and the way that he just immerses himself in that kind of thing, it's really inspiring to see someone graph so hard, but who has this naturally creative personality. He can achieve some wondrous things. He really does.
That is fascinating, isn't it? And that is something that has fascinated me, because it's funny because like you can. When you see like musicians and stuff, like they all have different talents and they all understand music differently, because there is the people that get like the concepts and the theory and all that. And like I was saying before when I was talking, like, like you get the guys that can just listen to something, they can just play it, but you get the other guys who are good musicians, but they don't work that way. And it's just interesting how like everyone seems to not only come to music, but also like understand music in different ways. You get people that make like incredible like electronic music, and it's not even through any musical skill, it's more just through very clever experimentation. And that's always fascinated me about music, and that's always what I think when you hear a band that you really like. Often it's because it's not even because like you get guys that are like great players that can go on stage and they can jam and they're awesome, but they can't write a song. You get that sort of thing, and it's just fascinating how like people say musical talent, but musical talent is a spectrum, because like there is different levels and different types of musical talent, if you know what I mean.
I couldn't agree with you more, mate. I mean, I exalt or consider music itself to be godlike because of like you say, the size of the spectrum. It's like you've got people, as you're saying, like Aphex Twin, who can create sound and compositions by literally taking apart analog synthesizers and rewiring them. But then you've got music composers who create music concrete out of things that aren't even considered conventional musical instruments. There's such a you could from the day of your birth to the day you die attempt to study everything about music, and you won't even come close. Which is why I consider music godlike, is because it could never be conquered by one person alone. It's impossible. So therefore, it supersedes one man's capability. Therefore, it's godlike.
Yeah, that's interesting, and that just makes me think of. I've always said that to people because, I mean, I don't think people realize it, but what everyone wants to do is creation. Whether you have kids or you make art or you start a business. Everyone, the pinnacle of what everyone does in their life is creation, and that for me is because that's what God does. God creates. So whatever way it is, if you're having kids, you're making art, you're building a business, whatever you're doing, you're creating something. And the reason like that's such an impulse in humanity is because, that's God's function.
That's spot on. Yeah, that's a really good, sweet way of looking at it. I never considered it like that. But yeah, you're right. You're absolutely bang on the money there, I think.
Yeah, I think so. It's very interesting, right? So we're kind of coming towards the end of the show, and I've got to say I very much enjoyed this conversation. Yeah, very interesting to pick your brains about this stuff, man. But like, I know you've mentioned a bit about the upcoming album, but like, is there anything else we haven't mentioned you want to tell us about? We can talk about it now.
On the 5th and 6th of October, we are actually playing our first live debut. I mean, I know we've talked about how we've done this and achieved that. We've achieved all of that without anyone of us actually being in the same room at the same time, funnily enough, because we were just a studio band to start with. It was just more of a means to, having a bit of fun with the style and enjoying ourselves. But it's built ahead of steam, where people are wanting to hear us play live. So we've got our first show on the 6th of October at the Blackwood Gathering through Blackwood Productions, our promotion, sorry. So we're really looking forward to that. And because I live in Middlesbrough and the rest of the band live in various locations in West Yorkshire, and our keyboard player lives up in Newcastle, it's quite difficult for us to be able to commit to a lot of live shows, but we are looking forward to dotting ourselves about the bit and, maybe playing a few more live shows, so, keep them peeled.
No, yeah, Rick, that sounds awesome, man. Like, it's good that you're playing live and stuff like that, and if you can ever make it up here, up to the frozen north, I will definitely come and see you, man.
So just, whereabouts, up in Scotland are you based?
I'm in Glasgow.
So Glasgow, there's always lots of stuff going on up there, and we'll see. Like, I've always been of the opinion that I don't want to be the kind of band that plays the local boozer every week. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. Just given my, my other commitments and things like that, and as the band's spread around, as I've mentioned, that's not something we can realistically do, even if you wanted to. But we would like to think that we'd like to give some of the people that do like what we do a reason to come out and see us, because we don't often frequent. So I would be very selective of the places that we would be playing. But I'd definitely put, Glasgow, Edinburgh, within Scotland as places I'd definitely like to. So if we get up there, then, I'll make sure to shot you a message, make sure that you're well aware of our presence if it happens.
Yeah, big time. I'll definitely be there. Rick, this has been an excellent conversation, man. I'd like to thank you a lot for coming on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks very much for having us, man. I really appreciate you. You wanted us to be a part of the show, and I'm really glad.
So my thanks again to Rick for coming on the show. Excellent conversation. And Hryre are definitely a band I would say to keep your eyes out for in the future. So that is it for another show. The website, bresnix.com, bresnix.com. Follow me on Twitter, @VladimirBresnix. Again, Black Metal Week will continue tomorrow. It will continue till there's no more shows left, basically. But before we end today, let's hear Hryre again. So this is Plagues on Ancient Graves.
tainted by laws within an omnipotent fallacy. Acrimonious hate fills my mouth. When free will is all but an invention of evil, all that is left is deference. Suppressing the beauty of mind and body in the name of your God. For he who decides what is virtuous and holy by the word of the law